17 black celebrities who had the most beautiful eyes. What if I told you some of the most unforgettable faces in Black Hollywood were remembered not for fame, talent, or scandal first, but for a single look? These were the eyes that stunned cameras, stole scenes, and left people obsessed for decades. Stay with us until the end, because once you see the stars on this list, you may never look at beauty the same way again. Subscribe now to the Black Excellence List. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. never had the kind of face people called perfect. What he had was something far rarer, a look that felt lived in. Even before disaster changed him, there was already speed in his expression, intelligence in his timing, and a kind of alertness that made it seem as if he could read a room before he ever opened his mouth. Then came the 1954 car crash that took his left eye. He nearly lost far more than that, and when he finally returned to public life, he did so first with an eye patch, and later with a prosthetic eye. For another performer, that might have become a permanent shadow. For Sammy, it became part of the face the world would never forget. What made him unforgettable was not damage alone, but the way he carried it. One eye still flashed with wit, rhythm, mischief, and nerve. The other brought stillness, weight, and a trace of what life had already taken from him. Together they gave his face an unusual tension. He did not look polished in the easy Hollywood sense. He looked seasoned. He looked like a man who had already met pain, walked through it, and refused to let it empty him out. Would you have noticed the loss first, or the courage behind it? That is what gives Sammy Davis Jr. such depth in a story like this. His eyes did not sell fantasy. They held proof. In an industry that prized smoothness, symmetry, and surface, he stood in the light with visible change and somehow became even more magnetic. The beauty in his gaze came from something deeper than appearance. It came from survival, from pride, and from the quiet power of someone who came back altered, but never diminished. Eartha Kitt. Eartha Kitt never possessed the kind of beauty that invited easy admiration. Her presence carried edge, discipline, and a kind of elegance that always felt slightly dangerous. Long before people tried to define her, she had already become unforgettable simply by the way she looked back at the world. Her face was striking, but it was her eyes that held the real charge. Dark, narrow, and intensely alert, they never seemed passive for even a second. They watched, measured, challenged, and tempted all at once. When Eartha Kitt stepped into the role of Catwoman in the late 1960s, the casting felt almost inevitable. She did not need to perform danger in an exaggerated way because it already lived in her gaze. She could turn her head, hold a glance for a moment longer than expected, and suddenly the entire scene felt tighter. No raised voice was required. No dramatic movement had to announce control. Her eyes had already done that work before the dialogue even arrived. And wasn't that the mystery people could never resist? She never looked harmless. Even at her most glamorous, there was always something untamed beneath the polish, as though amusement and warning were sharing the same expression. That tension made her magnetic. Viewers were drawn in not because she looked soft, but because she looked fully aware of her effect. Eartha Kitt's beauty carried wit, confidence, appetite, and distance. Decades later, that gaze still refuses to become ordinary. It remains sharp, self-possessed, and vividly alive, the kind of screen beauty that does not fade because it was never built on sweetness alone. It stayed unforgettable because it suggested danger, intelligence, and desire without ever pleading. Djimon Hounsou. Djimon Hounsou never needed eye color to leave an impression. His beauty came from gravity. When he entered the frame, his gaze carried weight, as if it had already lived through history before the scene had even begun. Born in Benin and later rising in American film, Hounsou broke through as Sankey in Spielberg's Amistad, a performance that earned him a Golden Globe nomination. Roger Ebert wrote that his performance depended largely on his screen presence and called that presence formidable. Later, Hounsou earned Academy Award nominations for In America and Blood Diamond, confirming that what audiences felt in his eyes was not accidental. It was part of the force he brought to the screen. What makes his eyes so memorable is their depth. They do not flirt with the camera. They confront it. In Amistad, they carried rage, dignity, and the memory of stolen freedom. In Gladiator, they made silence feel noble. In Blood Diamond, they held sorrow and exhaustion without losing strength. That range matters. It shows that his gaze was never just handsome. It was expressive in a way many actors spend careers chasing. Could you look at a face like that and not feel something shift? Djimon Hounsou's appeal rests in restraint. He does not need styling or exaggerated charm. His eyes do the hardest work themselves. They suggest endurance, pain, intelligence, and self-command in the same instant. His face lingers after the scene ends. Some screen icons are remembered for brightness. Hounsou is remembered for intensity, for the feeling that his gaze is carrying more than dialogue could say, and for the kind of beauty that grows stronger the longer you look. Smokey Robinson. Smokey Robinson carried a different kind of beauty from the start. It was not severe, not intimidating, and not built on drama. His face always seemed lit from within by something softer, elegance, ease, and a kind of romantic calm that matched the music he helped build at Motown. Britannica credits Robinson and the Miracles as one of the acts that helped define the Motown sound of the 1960s, and that matters here because his eyes became part of that same impression, smooth, luminous, and instantly recognizable. Even now, writers still describe them as golden green, a detail that has followed him for decades. Robinson himself has also spoken publicly about people saying his eyes seem to change color. What made Smokey's eyes so memorable was the way they worked with everything else people already felt from him. His voice floated. His phrasing glided. Songs like "The Tracks of My Tears" and "Tears of a Clown" carried longing without heaviness, sadness without bitterness. His gaze did something similar. It did not overpower the camera. It drew the camera closer. Under stage lights, those eyes could look warm one moment and almost reflective the next, giving his face a tenderness that never slipped into weakness. Can a pair of eyes look gentle and unforgettable at the same time? With Smokey Robinson, they could. There was also something culturally striking about him. In a business that often rewarded louder forms of charisma, Smokey's appeal felt refined. He did not need sharp angles, exaggerated poses, or a confrontational stare. His beauty rested in glow poise and emotional readability. That is harder to achieve than people think. Many famous faces are attractive. Far fewer seem to carry melody in their expression. Smokey Robinson did. His eyes were not memorable only because they were unusual. They were memorable because they looked exactly like his music sounded polished, wistful, and impossible to mistake for anyone else's. Vanessa Williams. Vanessa Williams has the kind of face the camera understands immediately. Before she speaks, before a scene settles, your attention is already drawn upward to the calm brightness in her gaze. Her eyes do not create mystery in the smoky, dangerous way Eartha Kitt's did. They do something more refined. They bring light symmetry and a kind of polished confidence that makes beauty feel effortless. When Williams made history in 1983 as the first black woman to win Miss America, the country was not only seeing a poised young woman take the crown, it was seeing a face that looked both radiant and self-possessed, and her blue eyes became part of that image almost instantly. Vanessa Williams's eyes are striking because of the balance they hold. They are bright without looking cold, vivid without looking hard. Under stage lights or in close-up, they can seem almost glass clear one moment, then warmer and softer the next. Years ago, she told people that Jean-Claude Van Damme once said her eyes looked like lasers, and the compliment makes sense. There is precision in them. They do not wander. They arrive. Can beauty feel graceful and sharp at the same time? On Vanessa Williams, it can. Across music, television, Broadway, and film, that gaze kept the same effect. It added polish to glamour, but it also suggested discipline, intelligence, and complete self-possession. Many famous faces look beautiful for a second and then fade into the frame. Vanessa Williams never does. Her eyes hold the image together. They give elegant structure. They make her beauty feel not fragile, but composed, deliberate, and lasting, the kind that remains in memory long after the scene moves on. Dourdan. Dourdan carried the kind of eyes that could make television feel more dangerous. Before a line landed, before the camera settled, there was already something unusual in his face, green eyes that looked lit from within, cool but not empty, sharp but never stiff. On CSI, where he became recognized as Warwick Brown, those eyes gave him an edge no costume could create. Under the hard laboratory lighting of that series, they could appear glassy one moment, shadowed the next, as if they were always seeing one layer deeper than everyone else in the room. That was their beauty. They did not simply decorate his face. They altered the atmosphere around him. Most striking of all was the contrast. His features carried warmth, masculinity, and confidence, yet his eyes introduced another note mystery. They made him look thoughtful without seeming soft, guarded, without seeming distant, handsome, without becoming ordinary. And who could glance at a face like that and forget it? The question almost answers itself. Dourdan never needed exaggerated expressions. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a pause, a turn toward the light, and the frame felt more intense. What audiences responded to was not color alone, but the way that color behaved on camera. His eyes could look elegant, dangerous, wounded, or unreadable depending on the scene, which gave his beauty unusual depth. Many actors are attractive in still photographs and less memorable once they move. Dourdan was the opposite. The camera seemed to discover something new in his gaze each time it came closer. That is a gift. It turns good looks into presence, and presence into the kind of beauty people remember years later. Stacey Dash. Stacey Dash had the kind of beauty that the camera did not merely record. It seemed to sharpen. When she rose to pop culture fame as Dionne Davenport in Clueless, 1995 audiences remembered the fashion, the attitude, and the comic timing, but they also remembered her face, especially the brightness in her eyes. Dash later reprised Dionne in the Clueless television series, which helped fix that image in the public memory for years rather than just one film. What made her eyes so striking was not simply color. It was the way they seemed to change character with light expression and mood. In one moment, they could look cool, polished, and almost untouchable. In the next, they softened just enough to make her beauty feel playful rather than distant. That shifting quality gave her face unusual energy. She never looked flat on screen. Her eyes kept the image alive. They caught light beautifully, but they also gave back attitude, wit, and a hint of mischief. How often do you see eyes that look stylish and alive at the same time? That was part of Stacey Dash's advantage. Many attractive faces photograph well, then fade once the scene begins to move. She did the opposite. The more the camera stayed on her, the more her gaze seemed to reveal, not in a dramatic way, but in quick flashes of confidence, amusement, and control in Clueless. Wentworth Miller. Wentworth Miller has the kind of face that becomes more arresting the longer you study it. Nothing about his appeal feels loud. It is cool, measured, almost architectural. When Prison Break turned him into a global television star in 2005, much of that effect came from stillness. As Michael Scofield, he played a man whose mind was always moving several steps ahead, and his gaze became part of that design. Even when the dialogue was spare, his eyes suggested calculation, restraint, and a private storm held firmly under control. That role made him world famous and earned him a Golden Globe nomination, but the fascination was never only about the character's intelligence. It was also about the way Miller could look at a wall, a person, or a locked door and make thought itself feel cinematic. His beauty works through contrast. The face is calm, almost sculpted, yet the eyes keep it from becoming remote. They bring a shifting quality to the image at one angle, reflective at another, severe, and in close-up almost impossible to read completely. That unreadability became part of his magnetism. Viewers were not drawn to softness with him. They were drawn to precision, to the sense that something deeper was being held back on purpose. Can mystery sometimes be more captivating than warmth? On Wentworth Miller, absolutely. What lingers is the control. Many actors look striking in photographs and ordinary once the camera stays on them. Miller does the opposite. The longer the shot lasts, the more his gaze seems to gather force. It does not plead for attention. It quietly takes it. That is a rare kind of screen beauty, one built not on brightness or ornament, but on tension intelligence, and the feeling that behind those eyes, an entire strategy is already unfolding. Jesse Williams. Jesse Williams has the kind of eyes that make people pause before they can explain why. They are bright. Yes, but brightness alone is never enough to stay in the memory. What gives his gaze its hold is the contrast inside it. On first glance, those blue eyes look cool, clear, almost effortless. Then the camera comes closer, and something more complicated appears. Thought restraint and a quiet self-possession that keeps the beauty from feeling lightweight. When Williams broke through as Dr. Jackson Avery on Grey's Anatomy, first appearing in Season 6 in 2009, those eyes immediately became part of his screen identity. They caught the hospital lights in a way that made every close-up feel cleaner, sharper, more precise. What makes them truly fascinating, though, is that Jesse Williams himself has spoken critically about the very standard people often project onto him. In interviews, he has said that society teaches people to think blue eyes are hot, and that European beauty standards have given him access. That honesty changes the way his face registers. You are not just looking at someone the culture decided was attractive. You are looking at someone fully aware of how that decision gets made. And doesn't that make the gaze feel even more striking? It keeps his beauty from becoming decorative. It gives it tension, intelligence, and a kind of unexpected depth. On screen, his eyes can look polished one second and piercing the next. They never seem flat, never merely pretty. They sharpen emotion, add poise to silence, and make stillness feel deliberate. Plenty of actors are handsome. Jesse Williams has something harder to forget eyes that look luminous at first, then reveal a mind watching from behind them. That is the difference between a pleasant face and a memorable one. Terrence Howard. Terrence Howard has the kind of eyes that never look decorative. They do not sit lightly on the face or simply add polish to it. They burn slowly. On camera, they often seem amber, one moment darker the next, as if warmth and danger are sharing the same space. That is part of what made him so difficult to ignore when his film career accelerated through Crash and then reached another level with Hustle and Flow, the performance that brought him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. He was not the kind of leading man whose beauty felt effortless or soft. His appeal came from tension. His face could look worn, handsome, guarded, and deeply alive all at once. What made those eyes memorable was the feeling that something restless was always moving behind them. In quieter moments, they could look tired, almost wounded, as though life had already taken more than it should have. Then the expression would tighten, the gaze would sharpen, and suddenly the whole face seemed lit by willpower. That shift gave him unusual screen heat. He did not need grand gestures to hold attention. A glance was often enough. Isn't that the rarest kind of beauty, the kind that feels dangerous because it feels real? With Terrence Howard, the camera never found emptiness. It found pressure, pride, and a trace of volatility that made his features feel charged from within. That is why his eyes stayed in the mind. They were not beautiful in a polished magazine way. They were beautiful because they looked lived in. They suggested longing, calculation, hurt, and hunger without flattening into one emotion. Many actors are easy to admire for a moment and easy to forget the next. Terrence Howard was never built that way. His gaze had too much smoke in it, too much memory, too much unfinished weather. And that gave his face a beauty that felt less like surface and more like fire held under glass. Tyrese Gibson. Tyrese Gibson has this kind of eyes that stop a face from ever looking ordinary. They do not soften him, and they do not make him seem delicate. They do something much harder than that. They create contrast. Set against his strong jaw, heavy voice, and unmistakably masculine presence, those green eyes give his face a sharpness that feels almost cinematic before he says a single word. They catch light in a way that makes him look intense from one angle, reflective from another, and quietly dangerous from the next. That shifting effect is where much of his beauty lives. What makes his gaze so striking is that it never feels separate from the rest of him. On some men, unusual eyes can look decorative, as if they were added only to make the face prettier. On Tyrese, they feel fused to his energy. They make the toughness look more interesting, the confidence look less predictable, and the emotion feel closer to the surface without weakening his image. How often does a man look this hard and this memorable at the same time? That is why his eyes stay with people. They hold edge without emptiness. They bring coolness, but never lifelessness. Even when his expression is still, there is a sense that something is moving underneath: pride, restraint, impatience, hurt, all of it flickering just beneath the surface. The result is a face that never feels flat. Tyrese does not have the kind of beauty that asks to be admired politely. His look hits harder than that. It lingers because those eyes give his whole face tension, and tension is what makes beauty unforgettable. You do not remember them simply because they are green. You remember them because they make him look singular, tough, vivid, and impossible to mistake for anyone else. Nicole Ari Parker. Nicole Ari Parker has the kind of beauty that does not rush toward you. It settles in slowly, then refuses to leave. Her face has always carried elegance, but her eyes are what give that elegance depth. They do not flash in an obvious way or ask for attention too quickly. They glow. On screen, that glow feels mature, composed, and quietly luxurious, the sort of beauty that becomes more impressive the longer the camera stays close. When Parker rose to wider recognition through Soul Food playing Terry Joseph on the Showtime series from 2000 to 2004, viewers were not responding only to style or glamour. They were responding to a gaze that looked intelligent, contained, and unmistakably self-aware. Her performance earned her multiple NAACP Image Award nominations, which says something important: the impression lasted. What makes her eyes so memorable is their balance. They are warm yet never overly soft. They are polished yet never empty. In one close-up, they can hold calm authority. In the next, they reveal hurt restraint and a thought held back just long enough to make you lean in. That is a rare gift on screen. Many beautiful faces register all at once and then flatten. Nicole Ari Parker's face keeps unfolding, and her eyes are the reason. How often do you see eyes that look this graceful and this commanding at the same time? There is also something deeply cinematic about the way her gaze carries adulthood. It does not rely on girlish sparkle or exaggerated seduction. It carries experience. That gives her beauty unusual staying power. In Soul Food, in Brown Sugar, and across the rest of her screen work, her eyes bring refinement without coldness and emotion without overstatement. They complete the face, but they also elevate it. You do not remember them because they are merely pretty. You remember them because they make her beauty feel finished, assured, and impossible to cheapen. Forest Whitaker. Forest Whitaker has one of the most recognizable faces in American film, and much of that recognition begins with his left eye. The slight droop known as ptosis gives his gaze an unevenness that most actors would have been told to correct. Whitaker never built his beauty around correction. He built it around presence. In a 2007 Esquire interview, he said the condition is hereditary, that it affects his vision, and that he had considered surgery for functional reasons rather than cosmetic ones. That honesty matters because it frames his face exactly the right way, not as a flaw hidden under performance, but as a feature that helped make his screen image unforgettable. What makes his eyes so compelling is the tension between them. One seems more open, more direct. The other hangs back slightly, giving the whole face a thoughtful, inward quality. The result is mesmerizing. Instead of symmetry, you get depth. Instead of easy prettiness, you get something slower and far more memorable. His beauty does not arrive in a flash. It gathers. In close-up, that asymmetry makes him look reflective, watchful, and emotionally layered all at once. How often does a face become more striking because it is less perfect? Very rarely, and that rarity is exactly why Whitaker lingers in the mind. The camera understood that long ago. In The Last King of Scotland, the performance that won him the Academy Award, BAFTA, Golden Globe, and SAG Award for Best Actor. His eyes did extraordinary work. They could look sleepy one moment, menacing the next, then suddenly wounded beneath all that power. Few actors can make a face suggest so many inner states without ever reaching for excess. Forest Whitaker's eyes are beautiful because they refuse to be simple. They bring gravity, vulnerability, intelligence, and danger into the same frame, and once you notice that, it becomes impossible to look away. James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones had one of those faces that seemed to carry authority before a word was spoken. People often remember the voice first, and understandably so, but the face was never secondary. His eyes gave that voice somewhere to live. On screen and on stage, they brought weight, patience, and a kind of grave stillness that made him feel larger than the moment around him. Britannica notes that his career stretched from The Great White Hope, which earned him an Academy Award nomination, to iconic later work such as Darth Vader and Mufasa. What stayed consistent across all of it was presence, and much of that presence rested in the way he looked at the world, steady, deep-set, and impossible to rush. His eyes were not beautiful in a bright or delicate way. They were beautiful because they felt carved. They held age, discipline, and an almost ceremonial calm. In close-up, they could seem stern without becoming cold, thoughtful without becoming distant. That is a rare balance. Many actors know how to project intensity by pushing outward. James Earl Jones did something richer than that. He drew the eye inward. The longer you looked at him, the more his gaze seemed to gather history, wisdom, and restraint into one expression. And who could mistake a face like that for anyone else's? No one. His beauty lived in permanence. It did not flash and disappear. It settled over the frame and gave it shape. That is why his eyes lingered in memory, even beside one of the most famous voices in American culture. They gave dignity to silence. They made stillness feel full. On a younger man, such a gaze might have looked severe. On James Earl Jones, it looked earned. The result was a kind of beauty that never depended on softness, novelty, or charm. It came from depth, from command, and from the feeling that he had already seen more than he would ever need to prove. Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald did not have the kind of beauty that demanded attention in a single flash. Hers worked more gently than that. The longer you looked, the more it opened. Long before she was known as the First Lady of Song, she had already learned how to make an audience feel welcomed rather than dazzled, and her eyes were part of that gift. Britannica notes that she came to national attention after winning a talent contest at Harlem's Apollo Theater at 16, later recording A Tisket, A Tasket, and becoming one of the best-known female jazz singers of the 1940s and 1950s. On stage, her face carried none of the hardness that fame sometimes creates. Her eyes looked bright, amused, and deeply present, as if every lyric had already passed through her heart before it reached her mouth. What made Ella's eyes so beautiful was their warmth. They did not challenge the camera the way Eartha Kitt's did, and they did not hold the cool mystery of Wentworth Miller or Gary Dourdan. They offered something rarer: ease. When she smiled, her whole face seemed to soften from the eyes outward, and even in still photographs, there is often a feeling of generosity in the way she looked at the room. That softness was not weakness. It was confidence without strain, elegance without distance, joy without performance. And isn't that its own kind of radiance? On Ella Fitzgerald, absolutely. Even late in life, after diabetes had damaged her eyesight, the face people remembered still carried that same tender light. Her gaze never depended on sharpness alone. It depended on spirit. Some eyes impress because they are unusual. Ella Fitzgerald's stayed with people because they looked kind, musical, and fully alive. They gave her beauty a grace that outlasted fashion glamour and every passing trend. Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard had eyes made for velocity. Even before he became one of boxing's most elegant champions, his gaze already carried the qualities that later defined him in the ring: brightness, concentration, and that quick, unmistakable spark that made him look alive from every angle. Team USA still marks his rise through the 1976 Olympic gold medal in Montreal, while Britannica notes the agility and finesse that helped make him one of the most admired boxers of his era. On camera, those qualities translated into something rare. His eyes did not simply look handsome. They looked alert, athletic, and beautifully awake, as if the whole face were already leaning toward the next move. What made them unforgettable was the way they balanced grace and danger. Leonard never had the heavy, punishing stare of a man trying to frighten people before the bell. His beauty worked differently. His eyes stayed light on the surface, almost fluid, yet underneath there was steel. In photographs and fight footage, they could look clean and boyish 1 second, then sharply focused the next, and that shift gave his face extraordinary appeal. How often do eyes look this beautiful and this competitive at the same time? Very rarely. That is why viewers kept watching him even when he was standing still. The speed was already there in his expression. Then life tested the very feature that made his ring presence so vivid. In 1982, Leonard suffered a detached retina in his left eye while training, underwent surgery, and retired before eventually returning to boxing. That history only deepened the way people saw him. His eyes were no longer just part of his image. They came to represent precision under pressure and beauty that had survived fear. Leonard remained striking not because his face looked untouched, but because his gaze still carried clarity, resilience, and the kind of confidence that never needed to shout. Erick Sermon. Erick Sermon has the kind of eyes that do more than attract attention. They brand a face. In hip-hop, where image matters almost as much as voice, that matters enormously. Sermon rose to prominence as a member of EPMD, one of the defining rap groups of the late 1980s and early 1990s, but his look gave him something extra that few artists could claim on sight. He became known as the Green-Eyed Bandit, a nickname so strong it stopped sounding like a gimmick and started sounding like identity. In his case, the eyes were not a minor feature people noticed later. They were part of the first impression, part of the aura, part of the reason the face stayed locked in memory. What makes Erick Sermon's eyes so striking is the way they sharpen everything around them. On another man, green eyes might have felt decorative or too polished. On him, they add edge. They make the stare feel colder, more focused, more self-assured. Set against the confidence of his delivery and the toughness of East Coast rap, that unusual color created a contrast people could not ignore. His face never looked soft because of them. It looked more specific, more cinematic, more difficult to confuse with anyone else. And isn't that what unforgettable beauty really does? It does not just look rare, it creates a signature. His eyes gave him distinction, but they also gave him attitude. They made the image feel complete. In photos, on album covers, and in videos, they brought a cool intensity that matched the music without overpowering it. Plenty of rappers had presence. Erick Sermon had presence with a visual stamp. His eyes were not memorable only because they were green. They were memorable because they turned his whole face into a statement, sharp, controlled, and impossible to overlook. Beauty is never just about color symmetry or what catches the light first. Sometimes it is about presence, mystery, strength, and the feeling a face leaves behind long after the screen goes dark. So here is the real question. Were these celebrities remembered for having beautiful eyes, or for having eyes that told a deeper story than words ever could? Tell us which gaze stayed with you most in the comments. And for more unforgettable stories, elegant deep dives, and powerful celebrity features, follow and subscribe to the Black Excellence List.